now get into the concept of tribal status. The very term tribal status sounds a little interesting. Who are we to offer a status to tribals? They live wherever they are living, they have their own lifestyle, they have their own status within their own community. We will presently get into the concept of tribal status. It is a very peculiar expression. Who are we to offer status to tribals? Why do we need to offer a status to the tribals? They are living their life wherever they are living, whatever is their own concept of status. But we shall presently understand why there is the need for according a status to the tribals. Tribal people who form 8.25% of nation's population, this of course as per 2001 census. They people India in different zones as a substantial part of India's population. The original inhabitants of the land in different parts and different zones of the country. Ethnic diversity is rather vast. In fact, Indo-Aryans from the northern parts of India and south of the Vindhyas, Dravidian, most of northeastern part, Tibeto-Burman, and further south and southeast Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Australoid. But then with such a variety, we need to accord something called tribal status, a status for them. Where? Status for them in the constitution of the country, which is the basis for the development perspective of the nation as a whole. Therefore, we need to distinguish between the term tribe and scheduled tribe. We are in the name of tribal status referring in essence only to scheduled tribes. What are scheduled tribes? Scheduled tribes are those tribal people in the length and breadth of the country who have been listed, enumerated, demographically analyzed, and they have become part of the special schedule 5 and 6 of the Constitution of India. Therefore, which means there are also other tribals who have not been listed, have not been enumerated, who have not been demographically analyzed. They have in a way shied away from the non-tribal people, whether it is government or other non-tribal population in the surrounding areas all the way, because they are the ones who have always manipulated and they have even, to use the word in a limited sense, cheated the tribal people. So, tribal people who are not enumerated are the ones who are living their original style of life unenumerated, that means in a way unscheduled tribe. What is the necessity for according a status to the tribal people? After all, first necessity is the identity for the tribal people as a part of the larger population of the country for whom development programs are being launched. So, therefore, tribals have to be accorded a status. This is a necessity for bringing about the amelioration among the life of the people to solve their problems. One of the first approaches in according the tribal status to the tribal people was the initial restriction for non-tribal people. In fact, initially non-tribals were even debarred from entering into the areas identified as tribal. But then there is also a necessity, given the rich cultural heritage of the tribal people, to preserve their rich cultural heritage. In fact, Northeast stands completely out as very distinct in its variety and diversity of rich cultural heritage compared to rest of India. Nehru, who was known for his love and appreciation for tribal people, in fact, whoever has gone through his book Philosophy for NEFA would understand that he loved the tribal way of life from the core of his heart. He wanted the tribal people in India to develop as per their own geniuses. Very unfortunately, non-tribal people always regarded tribal people as very primitive, pristine, older ways of life who never want to change and improve their lots. But Nehru said they should be allowed to develop as per their own wishes and framework of development. It is hard to digest, because after all any government will have to have a general framework for tribal people. Nehru did not believe in this. He said individual tribes must be allowed their own ways of developing. We only have to sort out their problems, and whatever land they are living in, they must be respected for owning the land. We must encourage even tribal languages. There is a whole variety of languages among the tribals, for which we know there are no written scripts, but some of them are unique and so colorful, so respectful. Nehru believed languages of the tribal people should be encouraged. There should be reliance of tribal people upon themselves. We shall not always tell them what to do, how to change, how to develop. What is the use of making a people and force them to change their ways in a certain way which is not to their own liking? So, Nehru believed in that kind of reliance to be given to the tribal people to develop in their own ways, and any administration should not try to impose too much of control over the ways in which tribal people lived their lives. There should be no over administration, to use Nehruvian expression, in the tribal areas. There are constitutional safeguards following the attachment of tribal status and listing the tribes as a part of the Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 of the Indian Constitution. Article 46, for instance, provides that states should promote special care of the tribal people to sort out the problems that they are facing, whether it is related to health, poverty, or any other kind. Article 244(2) in the 6th schedule emphasizes on self-government. Of course, this is quite in line with the Nehruvian principle that tribal people should be allowed to govern themselves. Article 330, 332 and 335 speaks about the allocation and reservation of seats in the Lok Sabha and the state legislatures to represent the tribal people. Then there is a very distinct concept that emerged following the independence, that is the concept of separate statehood. Concept of tribal councils came into picture. That means separate tribes or a group of tribes could be given a kind of a tribal council which will decide what needs to be done in the name of welfare of the tribes involved. Then a state reorganization commission, SRC as it is referred to, made its own recommendation. Reverend Roy, for instance, proposed that all hill areas to be linked with Assam, because northeast in fact till very recently would have been very difficult, till all the 7 states were created, to identify as distinct groups. Northeast Frontier Agency, when it was formulated, considered all the tribal people in the northeast as belonging to one large bunch of tribal people who needed to be helped for their own welfare and development. But then there was the proposal of Assam government that all eastern Himalayan sub-region consisting of Assam and all the neighboring tribal areas should be consolidated as one large group. That includes, besides Assam, Manipur, Tripura, district of Darjeeling, Jalpaiguri and Kuch Behar in West Bengal also, and of course, the so called NEFA, Northeast Frontier Agency, including Nagaland. A large chunk of groups which had to be developed together, because many of their problems are rather common. Now, SRC recommended the State Reorganization Committee in a way self-contradicting. 2 premises: no encouragement of small states. Just imagine tribals given statehood. How many tribes and how many states? Unimaginable, because there are innumerable number of tribes that are there in the length and breadth of India. They will put together certain tribes in order to give them statehood. So, one part of the recommendation was encouragement of statehood, but then there was a suspicion whether patriotism of hill people could be taken for granted at all. if they are given independence, especially the tribal people who are surrounding the borders with the neighboring countries, whether it is not going to put the international security into jeopardy. So, there was some suspicion also whether they can be relied upon, so especially those tribal people who are around the border areas. So, they were considered as little unreliable, for after all some of these tribes in the northeast in particular have always been demanding a separate identity. So, separate identity on the one hand and giving them independence on the other hand, thereby putting into question the international border security. Therefore, there was some opposition to the concept of hill state also, but Reverend Roy opposed in a way district councils would disappear, he said, once statehood is given. But then there was the fear of giving a hill state concept falling into the hands of non-tribals, because all kinds of tribals, especially in the northeast, have always played into the hands of the non-tribal people who have always tried to influence. Therefore, a concept of APHLC came up, that is All Party Hill Leaders Conference. That means you take into confidence the leaders of all different parties and constitute a council who could speak on behalf of all the tribal people. Now, we have tried to understand on the one hand the need for tribal status, but at the same time the difficulty in identifying the tribals, because if you look at the idea of giving them some independence to develop in their own style, but then independence is also fraught with the danger of a particular tribal group, whether it is at the district level or at the state level, trying to behave in its own way, very particularly the tribal groups which are in the border areas affecting the national security. After all, as we know, even to this day, a good number of tribals in the northeastern parts have always been fighting for separate identity. Now, separate identity for a tribe, including giving them independence to govern themselves on the one hand and the security on the other hand, particularly the national security and the identity and patriotism for the Indian Union as a whole, they are all a mixed bag. You do not know what to encourage, where to control, where to stop. So, this is about the concept of according tribal status, which is fraught with a whole lot of dangers around, but yet the basic problem remains that we have to accord the special status in order to identify what is to be done for the several problems that the tribal people through the length and breadth of India are facing, and after all Government of India and the provincial governments have got equal responsibility to make sure that the tribal people are taken care of as part of the larger population of the country. Coming to according tribal status, there is a very interesting dimension. In fact, it is a more recent phenomenon. We talked earlier in this episode about the distinction between tribe and tribal status. That means, those tribes which have entered the schedule in the constitution and those tribes which have not been enumerated at all. If it is a question of according tribal status to those tribes which have not been enumerated so far, the problem is very simple and straightforward and very logical. But the problem that is coming up in the recent times is certain groups which have been already part of the larger population in different parts of the country demanding that they should be accorded tribal status. That is, in the background of the development programs of which they have not been able to become a part. We can understand the scheduled tribes asking for this, but very interestingly we have also had groups which have demanded for the according of scheduled caste status also, and also in fact MBCs. It is a very interesting concept, interesting phenomenon, a very interesting demand which has come in the more recent times. After all, the ambition in the Constitution of India to make all these people forward and make them become part of the mainstream. But if more and more groups are demanding the special status, we do not know in the last 60 odd years after India's independence whether we are helping these groups to move forward or are they going backward, because identity of scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, backward community, etc., certainly means that they are backward. That means they are not moving forward. It is a very quixotic situation for any government, provincial or central government, to deal with. Initially, when the provincial governments and the central government had to think of according tribal status, they had some reservations. That is, if you accord the status directly to these people, there may be problems, but then the non-tribals and tribals, they had to be controlled in the given situation of according tribal status. Under this reserved approach, the governments, provincial as well as central government, thought that the non-tribals should be restricted in making their entry into tribal areas. The argument we considered to be very crucial in according tribal status to people who are identified as tribes as such for provision of development and welfare programs. When it comes to the idea of separate statehood, there is a vital question. After all, no single tribe occupies such a large area that it could be identified as a separate tribal state. There is always more than one tribe in the area. Then what happens for according a separate statehood in the name of a particular tribe? Then the idea of tribal councils came up, so that every single tribe or a group of tribes could be put together under a tribal council within the state reorganization as per the recommendations of the State Reorganization Commission.